Morning. Welcome to the April meeting of the Housing Advisory Board, Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board. As always, let's start with public comment.
You know, we didn't sign up, but here we are. Hello, my name is Crystal Jennings. What's your last name, Scott? Okay. And we are both, she's with Pittsburgh United, Celeste Scott, CJ Consulting. We just wanted to, myself, wanted to get clarification on on the, I guess, the 1 month contract that you guys approved at the beginning of March. I know that in the minutes it stated that it was for outreach, promotion, and marketing. So just clarification on that. I didn't get a chance to see the minutes of March, but I know it's in there. So if you guys could look through that real quick and give us an answer when you get to that part of the agenda, that would be awesome.
I'm Celeste Scott, Housing Justice Organizer for Pittsburgh United. I just wanted to say, talking about the 2019 allocation plan, that I hope there is a look at the consumer programs, especially the home ownership. The homeowner assistance program and the home stabilization program. We feel like those monies can be spent quickly, and if marketed well, they will be. So I hope there is a look at that and hopefully an increase in those monies for 2019. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we go ahead and any other public comment? Okay. Let's call the meeting to order. Roll call. Lena Andrews. Here. Jamel Bay. Not here. Richard Butler.
Present.
Kyle Chinalopoli.
Here.
Joanna Dimming.
Present.
Jerome Jackson. Not here. Teresa Cale Smith. Not here. Majestic Lane.
Present.
Mark Masterson.
Here.
Valerie McDonald Roberts.
Here.
Leslie Springs. Not here. Samuel Sue.
Here.
Sonia Tillman. Not here. Derek Tillman. Not here. Carlos Torres. Not here. Diamante Walker.
Here.
And Adrian Wanahal. And for the record, we do have a quorum. Did everyone get a chance to review the minutes? Can I hear a motion? So first motion, Joanna motion, and Majestic second for approval of the minutes. Thank you. Okay. D, recommend the approval of using wall-to-wall studios for amount up to $3,100 for the layout of a 4 to 8 page HOF annual report. We talked about this briefly last month. The legislation states that a report an annual report needs to be complete by June 30th of each year. So for 2018, we all know that we were extremely busy getting the allocation plan in place and the program set up, but did not expend the funding except for some administrative funds for the HRNA contract, and a couple other contracts and some staff salary. But those were the only expenditures out of the fund in 2018. So for that reason, staff was recommending that we do an RFP for these types of services for future years, but for the 2018 year, given the fact it will be a small report focused on the process that we went through in 2018, that we use an existing contract that the URA has in place with Wall to Wall Studios. And at the last meeting, the board asked that we go back and get some more clarifications. So we have since talked to Wall Studios, and there is an existing contract with a balance of $3,100. And they have stated that they will not exceed that amount. It will probably be less than 3,000. They're working with staff, and specifically Vatina, as she will supply them with most of the content for the report, photos, and the information, and they will help strictly with the layout. So it will be a collaborative effort with URA staff and wall to wall to do the layout and the just the stylistic. And then we are also issuing an RFP for printing, so we will get them printed separately. So this contract amount does not include the cost of printing. Any questions about that?
You mentioned that for future years, or I guess immediately for 19, that we would do an RFP, but that we wouldn't have to do that until later in the year, or beginning of next year, correct? For the report for this year, okay.
That's correct. Okay.
Money comes from the URA, not the Opportunity Fund?
Well, it will be paid for out of the administrative funds given to the URA through the Housing Opportunity Fund.
Would it be a higher cost to the HOF if we were to have it done separately from wall to wall? Is this a cost savings to piggyback on the URA's existing contract?
As far as we know, yes. We have not gotten specific other bids. Whenever we would do anything like this, we would do it through an RFP process. We're also kind of up against the timeline. But
Yeah.
our understanding is because Wall to Wall already has a lot of the material already in place,
Okay.
the colors and
Okay.
the way that they have done, other URA reports, that because of that, there is a cost savings.
So we can leverage the fact that the infrastructure already
It's already
exists.
there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Seems like a reasonable strategy.
Okay, can I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay, Diamante motions, Adrian seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next is the recommendation for the extension of the closing deadline from April 30th to July 31st for the RGP commitment in the amount of $600,000 made to Action Housing for Center Avenue Y MCA. I don't know if you have to go sit over there, but make
I'm
the.
going to recuse myself from this one.
So this was, I guess, in December of 2018. We approved, the advisory board approved the commitment of $600,000 to Action Housing for the YMCA redevelopment, and we have been giving everybody 4 months in the commitment letters. So each month when we bring these, we write a commitment letter afterwards and give them a 4-month, approximately 120-day period to close. If they do not close, we can reallocate the money, or they can ask for an extension, which is what's happening today. So we're here to review the extension. There was a letter included in your packet from Larry Swanson of Action Housing, basically stating that the major reason for the extension is they are still waiting for a commitment of RCAP funding to the project, which is that's a funding source through the state of Pennsylvania, and they are expecting the awards to be announced by the governor by June 2019. Therefore, they are queuing themselves up to be able to close as soon as that announcement takes place. They also have other lines of credit that once they know those funds are coming, they'll be able to close while they work with the state on the contracting process. So that is the reason for the request.
So I'm going to abstain from voting, but I have a question about the process. So is this to close on the whole deal, or just close on the funds with HOF?
Well, so traditionally what we like to do as a lender is close the same time everybody else closes. So that's the plan for really all of these deals, is to close when they're ready to start construction and when they have all other funding in place and we all go to the closing table on the same day. So that is the holdup. So they won't be able to close our funds until they close on their line of credit and other funding sources through the foundations, that they have everything in place to, the week after they close, be able to start construction.
But is there anything in the legislation that, just say, for example, HOF closing was July 1st and the other closing was July 15th? Is there anything that hinders that from happening?
I mean, there might be a rare situation where that would need to happen, but generally speaking, as a lender, we don't do that because we take the risk that they won't close the other funding and that the deal will not be able to move forward.
Because we're in second position.
On this deal, I think we actually might be in first position because most of funding is coming from grants.
I have to abstain from the vote because abstained from it originally.
Yep.
But from a policy question, we're definitely not last in money on these projects then. It's,
I mean, we're often first in because of the low interest rate or no interest rate.
Well, I'm talking about lien position, I'm talking about commitment. As we do this, we're kind of the first in that's trying to leverage other funds. Because RCAP, is that really, my experience with RCAP is that it's hard money to get. And it usually takes a couple of tries, but maybe that's already happened. I don't know the specifics, but.
No, I agree with you. Generally speaking, I misunderstood your question, I'm sorry, but generally speaking, we are last and we fill that final gap. This deal was a little bit different because it is so heavily dependent on grants that it's kind of like you need one to get another, which is why we made the commitment early. Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, this project is very complicated. It is our second time in with RCAP, and it's almost entirely grant funded because the rents are so low, and it's not a LIHTC project that it can't carry any debt. So we've secured a number of other grants. This definitely isn't the first in, but we do still have a gap, and we have a few other things that we're pursuing in case RCAP doesn't work out, and we have a funding source to bridge RCAP if RCAP does work out, but we just aren't able to close in April.
Yeah, I wasn't asking the specifics on what you guys are going to, because I've got to abstain from this vote. But our policy, there's no policy that we've set up that says we can't be first in or we shouldn't be we should be last in. I just want to be clear that it's okay to do this as a policy.
I mean, the title of the program is Rental Gap Program. It's supposed to be the gap, but there are times in development where it needs to come in early to help fundraise other sources of funding.
Thank you.
And there may be multiple gaps, so it's a question of which gap filler comes in first.
That's the thing.
That's another way to look at it.
Right.
So the request on the table is to extend the commitment date until July 31st.
I don't know if you, just to the conversation that just happened, I don't know if you had the discussion with Larry or Lena, if you can speak to it, but if you are pursuing other potential sources or if they are pursuing other potential sources in place of RCAP, in the event RCAP doesn't happen, is there confidence then that those others will be in place by July 31?
I'd probably prefer it if you go over
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Just because,
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense.
Yes, we are confident.
Okay.
We are extremely committed to this project. We've been fundraising for it for a year, and we're pretty close. So, yeah, we have a number of other things that we're working on.
The reason for the question, just that if July 31 doesn't happen, are we going to be looking at it again, or do we want to do?
That's really not our goal.
Okay.
The extensions, are they generally done in 60-day increments, or is it whatever's requested?
It's whatever is requested within reason. I don't see us doing much larger than a 60-day increment, but the 60 days is what they need to hear back from the state.
This is 90 days.
Or 90, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I don't think we've established this.
There's
set
not
policy.
a
It's flexible.
policy.
Okay.
Would be precedent.
Nope.
most of what we're doing.
We're setting precedent.
Flexible is the word.
But I mean, we do as a advisory board, and we do need to make sure we expend these monies timely.
Right.
So we do need to review these requests, I think, you know, with seriousness, but with when the staff reviewed it, knowing the timing of the RCAP request, it seemed like a feasible request.
Given, given how long the other funds are taking to get out, if we get this done by July, we'll be happy, right? I mean,
We'll be
if we
happy.
get this done by the end of 2019.
So my intent is not to create more work for your staff, but is it possible to get a list of the projects and what's encumbered so that as we're looking at these, we can kind of see like what's elapsing? So if we do need to do some sort of reclamation of funds, we don't allow it to sit for too long. And that doesn't have to happen every month, but maybe
Yep.
quarterly.
And I can tell you, I think we've done 5 commitments to date, I'm pretty sure. And I will announce that the first month in December was this one and was Riverview. Riverview will be closing within 2 weeks. So we have worked on closing costs. They will close by their timeline of April 30th. I need to check in on the status on the Observatory Hill project. That one came the following month, so that one needs to close May 31st. And then the 2 preservation deals that we brought to you 2 months ago, Wood Street and Parkview, Evan, those will both close within the next few weeks, correct? Yeah. I mean, those were not as complicated in terms of getting all the funders to the table, and those are on track to close.
So some sort of production report that says closed, scheduled to close might be helpful for us
Okay.
to look at as we make our deliberations.
When just on the timing question, so we did this as a rolling timeline with overlapping years in funding. So these extensions are gonna just get trickier as to us managing which year
Yep.
is which and spending down those dollars in a timely fashion. So obviously we're in a learning curve right now, but hopefully as we're going forward, that's something that we're really mindful of, because between the rolling and the overlapping years and delays, we're going to get to a place that is just very complicated.
Yep, and we can talk about it later, but it was our kind of intent that in 2019, there be a deadline for the rental gap program. This year was rolling because of the timeline.
Thank you.
So those are the 5, and as I mentioned, Riverview will close in 2 weeks. There's all kinds of closing calls going on about that right now. And Parkview Manor will also close in 2 weeks. Wood Street should be soon after. I need to check on the status of 5 Points. I'm not sure.
Can Lena sit down now?
Does anybody else have questions for Lena? Okay.
Motion to approve the extension.
Second.
Joanna motion, Kyle second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And what about abstentions? Because Mark brought up a good point. Anyone that's abstained like from this the first time through needs to probably abstain again. So we got Sonia, Mark,
Abstain.
Derek abstaining. I'm abstaining. And Lena, of course. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think one thing that would help, I know that we're sort of doing things for the first time, but maybe having somebody, if it's possible, when something like this comes up from the agency that's not the member of the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board would be a good thing. You know, I'm not saying that that's what we should, it doesn't matter for today, but maybe going forward, if something like this is coming up or an applicant's here, that there's somebody there from the organization that's not the member, so the member can actually abstain and stay out of the conversation for public appearance sake. I don't want to make any motions, and I'm one of the ones with a hard deadline, but
Yeah.
to
That makes
leave,
sense,
but,
yeah.
We didn't realize there would be discussion, sorry.
right.
Okay. All right. Next. Okay, this is what will take most of our time on today, I think, is discussing the 2019 allocation plan. Okay, so you have a couple things in your packet. But just to kind of recap for everybody and for the general public, we started a couple months ago with 5 annual allocation plan meetings in 5 regions of the city, north, south, east, west, central. Staff created a pretty robust summary report from those meetings. Additionally, there was a survey that was taken at the meetings but stayed online for at least a month afterwards. Jamie, how many people responded to the survey?
If you count the in-person meetings. Between the in-person meetings, the online survey, and the in-person survey with the Housing Authority, there's about 250 or 275.
275 people took the survey, and that was summarized in the report that we sent out. And I have a couple extra copies if anyone wants a color copy of the report. And so we distributed the report to the advisory board and then held 2 working group meetings at the URA over the last couple weeks where we discussed the report and any other feedback advisory board members had received from the general public. We also met with the Housing Authority and the Department of Human Services and basically discussed the existing 2018 plan, the pros and the cons, and what people wanted to see in 2019. And then we circulated a blank spreadsheet for the advisory board to complete, and we received 11 responses. I got one more last night that is not included in this data, but there were 11 responses included in the data you're going to see from the advisory board, and we combined the data and looked at the mean and the median, even did some samples that aren't on here that took out outliers, like the highest and the lowest, and it really didn't change the numbers that drastically. Everyone seemed to be somewhat similar. So we're going to go through this, and you have the spreadsheet in front of you. So this first one is the average. So just for the general public, these first 5 lines, rental gap, housing stabilization, down payment, homeowner assistance, and for sale, are the existing programs. Yes, Diamante.
Should, under demonstration dollars, should that total be 0.6? Or is it because of the decimal?
I'm not sure how
Probably
the
'cause of the
averages
decimal.
happen.
Okay.
It's coming to more decimals.
Okay, that's, okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was the case, all right.
So those first 5 programs are existing programs. We allowed advisory board members to write in additional programs. Demonstration dollars was written in as an additional program. And so those are the means, the averages. And so because only a couple people wrote in additional programs, those are basically like showing what was written. Yeah, and you can see when we do averages, and you'll see it on the next slide, medians, it does not necessarily total 10 million when you do it that way. So Evan, can you go on the median? The median and the average are pretty similar. We focused mostly on the median. So that's where the medians came out for the programs. And just to kind of put it in perspective, we have a copy of the 2018 plan in front of you if you want to kind of compare it to what we're doing this year. But this year, for example, the rental is 3.875. And so the median of the 11 responses came out to 3.75. Housing stabilization this year is 0.75, so the median is pretty similar to that. Down payment this year is 0.75, so the median goes down. a little bit there. I think homeowner went down a little bit, but not a lot, and for sale came out exactly the same as what it is this year. But you can see that the total only totals 9.43 when we look at the medians for each line item. Therefore, we looked at kind of looked at the numbers, and Evan, on this slide here. So we started with your median numbers. Recommendation was made to incorporate demonstration dollars into the emergency use with rental gap program. Just real quick, the person that wrote demonstration dollars in, can speak for themselves, but I think what the goal was to have kind of funds available when there are properties that have deed restrictions that all of a sudden are at risk, such as the Bethesda Homewood property that was in Homewood. Kyle, do you want to speak to it anymore?
In terms of the emergency use, that was sort of the idea, is that there's going to be circumstances that come up that none of us foresee, be it Bethesda Homewood, be it Penn Plaza, whatever the case is. And if we have all of our monies committed sort of explicitly in these buckets without some latitude to be responsive, that obviously limits us, right? And so that was some of the thought in terms of it. I mean, I had more monies in there for other potential things, whether it was the discussions that we've had with the Housing Authority and DHS.
And that was my intent with putting in demonstration dollars. It wasn't all for that particular bucket.
Okay.
There were some other potential uses that I thought could emerge this year, and I wanted to make sure that we had captured those.
Yeah, so,
And I think I just put mine in additional programs as sort of a blanket, because we had talked collectively about a variety of different options. But again, having something that gave us that flexibility to respond to an emergent need, to a unique opportunity, would be really powerful.
yeah, logistically, as we go through this conversation today, I'm more than welcome to have this conversation about, do we need a separate line item for those emergency type of things, and how do we identify that line item to city council, and so we
And
can-
assure its use, because
ensure
if
its
you put
use,
something aside and then
right.
it's not used, that would be awful.
right.
It's like a contingency. I mean, I don't know if the legislation allows for that, but if it's not used, we could have other intended uses, which could be the rental gap program.
Right. So we're fine with the contingency line and explaining it to council, or we can potentially add to the existing program guidelines to allow for emergency situations to go through the existing program guidelines. That might be another way to handle it. Either way. And then staff looked at it and said, okay, well, when we do the medians, we're short a little bit of, I think it was 0.57 million, 570,000 short. One potential staff recommendation for that 570,000 is rental. On the next couple slides, we wanted to talk real quickly, just because as staff, and this is unbiased opinion, except to say that our phones are ringing a lot on rental development. So Evan, can you go to the next slide? So we pulled some data. Evan and Jamie spent the last couple of days pulling some data on the current rental situation in the city. Most of you know that one reason this advisory board was formed was because of the needs assessment done that said we were 20,000 units short on rental housing. We're going to be working with the city to see, when we'll update that data. But in the meantime, according to Policy Map, those are the total number of cost burden households. So folks that are paying more than 30% of their income on housing, you can see renters, 45% are cost burden versus the homeowners at almost 20%. Evan, next one. Yeah.
Just to compare apples to apples, is that the same methodology that was used in the study that we commissioned as a city? Is it possible to use the same methodology so we know if that gap is getting better or worse over time, or is that?
One of the reasons that we're talking about updating that study is because the methodology that is used in that study is completely different from the HUD So HUD uses area median income, which is based on the county. That study uses what they call median household income, which is for the city. And then specifically to your question about the previous slide versus this slide, those are cost burden households overall. This slide is this side is the gap between those income bands, which again are not area median.
The reason
income.
I'm asking is that, it's almost not relevant to the conversation today, but we should always be using the same numbers as we're talking about this publicly. And that is helpful to I think, many of us to talk about the affordable housing crisis. If we have different numbers and different methodology, if we can just use the same number, they're all going to be bad numbers, that we've got a huge gap in the city. But it just is helpful to also gauge whether we're making an impact with these funds or not.
Absolutely.
And it's
And the
not-
reason why that study was so time consuming and expensive is because it is so difficult to do that data. So we want to have an update so that we can do the apples to apples. It's just not something that we could do in the time that we've been here.
But Mark, to your point, if we go back to the last slide, like that, the 45% of renters that are cost burdened, that includes, the Google employee who's making 100,000 plus and electively choosing to spend more than 30% of their income, right? Like, it's not just, if you go to the next slide, Evan, it's not just that gap. So it's exactly your point, but for the public and the viewers at home, hopefully there's some.
Jessica, are you essentially saying that this year it might be most strategic to focus on increasing the number of available affordable units through the rental gap assistance program?
Yes, I think we need to look at that as it relates to the need on the rental side versus the homeowner side.
Because one of the things that I've been saying is that I would love to see us try to bridge the gap with, no pun intended, with the foundation community, because maybe they can alleviate some of the burden around some of the social service stuff, which is in their wheelhouse. And the more dollars that could be developed to actually producing the units that are needed to address the issue, that the fund would be better positioned to do that, at least in the early stages. So if there's a way for us to start to think about how we make those connections, maybe this is our opportunity.
Yep, I agree.
So another strategy as it relates to production, I don't think I've seen it on anyone else's recommendations, is the landlord assistance program. I sent in mine's late, but I really think that's the fastest way that we can bring more units to market that are affordable. So I think we need to be strategically including a line item specifically for the landlord assistance program. And if we're talking about production, yes, there's a rental gap, but then I think we need to also put money in landlord assistance. It's just the fastest way to get more units to the streets now.
So here's my response to this, but this is just strictly staff response. Advisory board, is welcome to add it as a program. The reason it is not on here as a program is because we are working with other funders, and I know I've been telling you this for a couple months, but we feel like we are close to hopefully an announcement in an upcoming month here soon for the URA to borrow 0% interest or low interest money to then re-lend at 2% interest or some low interest amount to landlords. The reason to do it that way and not through the fund is because of we've talked to the housing authority at length about this, because we all know 70% of Section 8 vouchers are returned. And so we're trying to figure out a way to have a program for small landlords so that they can then rent to someone with a Section 8 voucher. And the housing authority's inspections are saying that these units need about $5,000 to $10,000 worth of work per unit. And with the Housing Opportunity Fund, with the goal being permanent affordability on the units, it doesn't, for a $5,000 to $10,000 loan per unit, it's probably not a reasonable request to ask someone to take even a 30-year affordability term if the loan itself is only 5 or 10 years. So that is why it is not listed on here, because it seems like it could be better operated with another source of funds. But with that said, if people want to see it on here, we can re-look at that.
And I can confirm that Jessica is really, really close to the thing she's been saying for every month for a couple months is not an imaginary idea. That the URA and the city and other partners, I think, are really close on having some space to create that kind of landlord assistance with partners who want to see that happen in neighborhoods across the city. So just wanted to, for the record, so that people know she's not making it up.
And what was the reason again for not doing the grant of 5,000 for landlords, since a lot of them are mom and pops and have, you know, weaker markets? And
I don't want to speak for all of you. We've had some of this discussion before, and I think I've heard some concern about giving it to landlords if they've historically not kept their property up to code and then giving them a grant. There's two sides to that. I'll let everyone else
Would it be
speak.
reimbursable? I mean, instead of some sort of endowment, would they be able to send the expenses and get reimbursed so that we can ensure that the money that's allocated is actually going to the uses?
Well, but the other thing I would say that the loan affords you the ability to do is on an ongoing basis, whether it's the 5 or 10 years, at least ensure that there's acceptance of Section 8, tenants with Section 8 vouchers, right? If we're in effect lending against that, and whether it's the FMR that's sort of higher than what they've been charging because they haven't been able to meet those standards or whatever the case may be, that sort of gives us still a contractual relationship that's ongoing in order to have
Because
that
the Section 8
protection.
subsidy is a grant, essentially, right?
Sure.
Okay.
But and I think to that point, I think the conversation about it, we give it to a mom and pop, and we're saying, how long are you going to make it affordable? So I would give you $5,000 to make it affordable for 5 years, or that's one thing. But if I give you $5,000, I say, I want it for 20 years. That's not an appropriate level, you know, for people to kind of find themselves in. So I think, you know, thinking about the extent of affordability would be really important if we're talking about from a grant perspective. And frankly, from a market perspective, like what areas are we trying to make sure that these places stay at this number in perpetuity versus is it a transitioning neighborhood? Is it other things that are happening in the neighborhood, other supports and layers that where the resources could be accented? So,
Is there something something in the NSP, the way that the URA does that with folks who own their homes and may have a low income borrower living in a rental unit, and there's like an affordability period of 15 years? Is there something that we could look at around that? That's sort of like a private owner who's leasing to a low to moderate income buyer, and the unit was improved. Maybe there's something there.
I mean, we can look at whether the small landlord program is operated out of HOF or not. We can look at what that appropriate period should be.
Well, and also with anyone that there's an investment made in, making sure that that's quality housing, that it actually is meeting fair housing standards, and that these are landlords that are following all appropriate guidelines for rentals, and their eviction process is appropriate. Those are administrative issues that I think can get really complicated, especially one unit at a time. But just really thinking about, again, making an investment in landlords that are going to use the investment in a way that meets all of the criteria related to fair housing, related to tenant rights, related to necessary improvements, that all should be wrapped in, it seems, and how we would go about doing that unit by unit is going to be something that we really have to think a lot about.
Yeah, I think you know, before even if it's determined that we don't use these funds, we need to kind of review the recommendations, because I think the structure of it matters for it to be successful. We can't overburden landlords, but we can't give them just a pass. I think it's about balance. So I think just really making sure that it works. To your point, you know, I think the inspection process is critical, because making sure that those things are, you know, rectified as part of using the funds. But really, you know, even the loan structure, it could end up backfiring. The whole intent is to increase production, not to, you know, negatively impact, and folks say, I'm not dealing with that for $5,000. So it's really about making sure that it's a win-win, as opposed to trying to put all these burdens on the landlord when we don't put the same burdens on developers. and you know I'm a developer, but still, I'm thinking about what's best for the city and not just myself.
Yeah, we're also talking to the housing authority about if there was a way to structure the program with part of the HAP payment that would go to the owner, that the debt service part of that comes directly from the housing authority to the URA, which would help with, I think, making it easier for the owner and also ensuring that we get repaid and continue to recycle the funds for additional units. Okay, so back to this. This is just another, yeah, that's okay. This bar chart here just also shows the what Jamie did was the small little charts represent the deed restricted units that the URA has. You know how we've been working on a database for the last year of deed restricted units. So any unit in the city that has something on the recorded on the property for affordability, those are those levels, the small ones, and then the larger ones per income level show how many people according to the census, right, Jamie?
Yeah, it's an estimate, but
Yeah, an estimate according to the census, how many people are actually at that level. So you can see the difference between the people actually at that income level and deed restricted units. Now, that's not to say there's not naturally occurring affordable housing. That also, she put statistics on the side about Section 8 vouchers and so forth, but that's also not to say that someone doesn't have a Section 8 voucher and is paying a higher market rate rent someplace else. But that's just strictly showing the gap in the deed restricted units.
Jamie, that's total households at that income level, not total households that are renter households, right?
no, it's renter households.
Renter households, okay.
Is it cumulative? Like the 780?
Yes, it's cumulative since the deed restrictions go up to and including everything underneath. So the one thing, one more thing to point out is we do know, based on data that the Housing Authority publishes on the Western PA Regional Data Center, that there are about 11,000 housing choice vouchers in use. Given that there are 73,500 households at or below 80% of AMI, and those are renter households, we know that there are 50,000 households at or below 80% of AMI without a deed restriction or a housing choice voucher. And about 40,000 of those are below 50% of area median income.
Okay, next slide. And this was also just real quick, just to show you the rental commitments to date and to show you that, when we do the rental deals, there were 545 units as part of these 5 deals that we've committed to date, and what the per unit amount is now. Now our per unit amount is, we only declare so many units HOF units, but if you want to say that the building wouldn't happen, but for the HOF money, then that would be the unit count there. Go ahead. And that was only just to explain, so we had the advisory board median, staff, we wanted to do our chart, and then we'll just let you discuss. So that was done. It was just an explanation for our chart. And what we did for our chart is we took your median, and then we took that remaining 0.57 and put it into the rental program, and we made also an additional 0.25 into the down payment program. We actually raised the rental program by 0.7. We did 0.25 into down payment to get it up to what it is this year, because we have no idea, we have no way of knowing how fast that money's gonna go. And then there was 0.57 extra, and then the remaining 0.4 or whatever it was, we took out of the homeowner assistance program, and that was just our recommendation. Yep.
A question on the down payment assistance program. That isn't what you said at the first working group meeting. It looked like we weren't going to get through all of the money for 2018. And I mean, that was how I was looking at this, is that what did you need to get through the 2 years? But you're telling me that did I misunderstand what you said?
At the rate we're going right now, I think what I said at the meeting was it is going to take us a year to go through it at the rate we're going right now. The unknown is if we do go faster when word gets out more. That's the unknown.
So if we can market it more, we can reach more people.
I understand. I thought that you thought it was going to be, you had the capacity to close like 10 of these a month or something like that. And if everybody's at the max and you do the math, it's.
It's not their capacity.
It's not
that's
capacity,
the demand.
it's how it's demand,
Yeah,
yeah.
It's the second meeting, Mark.
Okay, it was a second meeting.
weren't at the
I was only at the first meeting, so that's the assumption that you left everybody, I think,
I'm
at
sorry.
that table there.
Yeah.
That's what you guys were able to do.
Based on current demand, it'll take a year to expend the 700.
So what's our capacity then?
Capacity on down payment is not an issue.
Okay.
Down payments take about 2 hours of staff, 2 or 3 hours of staff time for each one, because we're relying on the bank's underwriting.
That's
So
fine.
we
And that
will
was-
actually crank those out as fast as they come in. Now, the homeowner assistance program is a lot more staff intensive in terms of hours for the URA.
Thank you.
Is Sharon on board with that?
Do you agree? I shouldn't speak for you, I'm sorry. Do you agree that the down payment you can crank out?
Yes.
So how do the emergency funds or additional program funds that are included in the rental gap program get isolated from being kind of swallowed up by the needs of that program?
We can do that however you would like us to do it. If people want to isolate X amount of rental gap for emergencies, we will isolate it and, only use that money when those types of requests come.
I mean, I think, I like the idea of having it included in the rental gap program, because if the emergency doesn't arise, or there is another answer for how we do some of the additional programs that we talked about, this program, I think, is gonna have this most immediate need, maybe. But I think we should make sure that we do, at the end of the year, have some money left in case an emergency does arrive.
Well, can you define what you mean by emergency?
That was like the
Just for
Bethesda
clarity.
Homes or Penn Plaza thing where like an immediate intervention is needed.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but Bethesda Homewood was an example of a project-based Section 8 deed restricted property that, because of the disrepair, then all of a sudden it was going to lose its project-based status, and the city was at risk of over 100 households, not having a place to go. And then the Penn Plaza example was a straight-out market. It was a property that was rented to a lot of people with Section 8 vouchers, and then the owner just decided to do something else with the property. So those types of situations.
For admin, can we do up to $1 million? I know that you've talked about, there are a lot of expenses, but I think that was a legislative
We can do up to $1 million.
recommendation.
Related to administrative, are we charging fees as all of these funds go out?
I'm pretty sure, the only program we're charging fees for is the rental gap program. But we are not charging fees to homeowners.
So the for sale development and the rental gap are the only two then, or you don't know what you're doing on the for sale, or
Yeah, I can't answer that right now. I'd have to
Why-
look, see what's in the guidelines.
why are we doing that with an admin budget of $1 million?
It was decided that the rental, I mean, a lot of these are, well over $1 million developments that have all kinds of closing fees and legal calls and so on and so forth. And it's not coming out, it's not like a homeowner having to come with money, but it's a multi-million-dollar development. It's a little bit different.
But do we need to be doing that to run the program, I guess? And should we be doing it? Because, hey, it's a fee, it's not everybody else is doing it, but does that mean we should be doing it? I don't know. Or do we need to do it? Or if we're doing it, can we take the fee and dedicate it to something else that's useful?
I mean, we did look at if we charge, the other thing is just to stay consistent with URA programs, but what we could do is charge the fee and then look at how much we brought in through that fee and put that portion of the admin into a program.
Love to have a sense of what some of these things cost administratively. Just what is the savings that we actually achieve by doing that? You know, what is going to come back into programs versus what is the actual cost of administering the program? I don't know if you do any of that.
Our fee for rental is 2%. So if you go back to the rental slide, you know, we've committed 1.8 million to date. So 2% of that is what will be coming in as a fee.
Okay, so I get that part, but what is the manpower, the labor, the administrative burden that occurs when we do these different things? Does it make sense to do it, or does it not make sense to do it? Are we expending more energy and resource to do it or not do it?
Yeah, that's a valid question, we really need to have either a committee meeting or discuss the URA staffing with you. We're trying to figure it out ourselves, and that's why I don't have better numbers for you. We're trying to figure out how much legal time, how much finance time, how much construction inspection time and engineering time are needed in all these things. It's a bit of an unknown right now. We're trying to figure out how we're going to account for it at the URA, like just in our accounting system and so on and so forth. Pretty soon we will get into regular billings of URA staff time to the HOF fund, and we'll be able to explain to you, you know, what those billings are and how, and you know, how we're doing it. But we got to get the construction inspectors and everyone knowing when they're working on an HOF project and billing it correctly. So that's been the holdup of why I can't give you that, but the goal is within a few more months, especially once the homeowner assistance program is up and running, to be able to give that to you. Yes.
So going back to the emergency component in the rental gap, because I'm just a little bit confused on how this would work, even with the two examples mentioned with the Bethesda homes. So those properties needed a lot more, you know, renovations than $500K. So I'm kind of sure, will we be looking to fill the gap with some other URA program? If we only have a portion and it's not really going to get us there, then how would these funds help that situation? And then with the other one, Penn Plaza, that's a private development where, you know, he made a decision. How would these funds have changed anything? So just trying to get some clarity around that.
Your situation.
Well,
I don't think that
I'll say
sorry.
with the Bethesda, it was an example of that largely there weren't enough resources in a really immediate time frame to turn that around. And it was really complicated to figure out who was able to layer to do that, and ended up being someone that had access to a lot of private capital, right? So if someone was trying to come in from a perspective of a community-based organization or CDC to do that, then that level of resources wasn't really there, kind of really in a quick turnaround. So that's why, you know, thinking about using it like this, it may not be the total gap, but it may be the ability, again, to go to philanthropy, go to a Bridgeway, go to somebody else and be able to say, hey, there is some other money that we can put towards preserving the affordability, you know.
It may not necessarily be a development of
Yeah,
hundreds
private
of
market
units.
can
It
do
could
it a
be
lot easier, frankly, in that
20-some unit
situation.
property or something that is a smaller intervention. I mean, I see the value in setting aside emergency funds. I just want to make sure that they're set aside.
And I actually think a good example of how you could use emergency funds is, I don't know if folks remember this, Chuck Keenan's in the audience, I'm sure he does. It was maybe 5 years ago at this point that there was an affordable housing complex that had major damage that happened unexpectedly. And so then you have that preservation question of this is affordable housing, it can be used, it is being used. What is it that this particular owner can do when this happens? We don't necessarily know. There's a time frame there that actually destabilizes, has people out of home for a significant period of time while a person tries to assemble this sort of complicated funding package to address something like that. Those kind of circumstances do happen, and we certainly would want to be able to address them when they do, because that created just layers and layers and layers of burden for the household, social service involvement, damage beyond what the physical damage was. And if we had opportunities to address something like that, it would be really transformative.
I mean, we could set it aside, so if we do like an RFP once a year or twice a year out of the 2019 funds, we would just not RFP that. So when that disaster happened, then they could apply without going through the RFP round.
So it's a rather arbitrary number, but right now the proposal is 4.45. Why don't we just set aside the 450?
We can, but I also want to make clear, this is just staff. Like, Evan, can you maybe put the Excel spreadsheet where they're all three? I don't want you necessarily staring at ours. We can go back to yours as well. This might be a little hard to see, but he has, yeah, can you explain it?
All right, so these are all of the programs that we're either recommending get funded or that were included in the advisory board sheets that were returned. And then each income bracket, so with 30%, what was the average for each program, what was the median, what's the staff recommendation? And then we have this April 4th recommendation column where if we want to kind of play around with it.
You can tell Evan what to type in.
Yeah, and it'll sum up by income bracket, so we make sure that we're hitting that 50, 25, 25. And then also on the far right, you'll see the total for each program. So this is 30%, 50%, and 80%.
I want to make a comment about the rental gap, because you talk about the demand and people are calling you, but I think you're not feeling the demand that's for like rental stabilization, because you're not a rental stabilization provider. So I think that like you might be a little skewed about the demand because of who you are. And I just wanted to draw attention to the housing stabilization line item on the average was quite higher than the median, 1.24. So maybe that could be rebalanced a little bit, keeping in mind that one of the points I made was I think there's other service providers out there. I mean, there's no shortage of demand and there's no shortage of need. So maybe there's additional, if capacity is an issue, you know, we can find some additional service providers to help.
Yeah, I guess if I'm thinking back to when we did the RFP as well, right, we got requests in totaling, I think, 1.5, right?
Right.
So the point, in the 0.8 and the 0.75 will be on the street at the same time, right? So for this year, there will be 1.5. Now, whether, if there's the concern around capacity for those that already requested the 1.5, you know, we obviously have a sort of runway to see how that goes out, but then it gives us an ability to, you know, I mean, we know there's a demand. I guess I'm interested in how many of those agencies are potentially hearing from the same people within the city. I mean, Adrian spoke a couple months ago to some sort of the demand as it relates to the county, right? And as we're thinking about the city, how we sort of balance those things out. Yeah.
I think with the housing stabilization, there are so many mechanisms in which we could bolster those systems and get economies of scale as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also with this particular set of money, I'm always thinking about what are those matching opportunities, what gets us further down the road. So is it further down the road to give 20 agencies small amounts of money, or does it get us further down the road to look at those matching opportunities where there's already infrastructure and we can get much more saturation and impact? And also, what dollars are we not drawing down from the state or federally because those funds don't have the matching levels that they need? Could this provide matching levels that actually help us leverage? In many of those funds, it's an 80%, 20%. That's a really great deal for us. Mm-hmm. If we can put in 20% of that and then leverage 80% on top of that, that would be really smart. So I think rental assistance is a tricky one, but I do think there are some good systems that exist and could be bolstered and give a lot more impact and saturation. And I know that there's dollars that are available that we're not drawing down locally because we can't from the matching perspective. And I'd love to see how we could infiltrate some of that market and again, just bring much more resource to the table and get more money out the door for the people who are really suffering. Because we just saw that cost burden number. That's an intense figure for us to get our brain around and think about addressing that from a variety of different angles. Where people exist, leveraging on resources so they can stay there. The housing that doesn't exist, making that possible. And again, thinking about our 30% and below folks because there really is not space for them. and they're going to get pushed out and pushed out and pushed out and pushed out and pushed out from everything that we do that's lifting the boats doesn't seem to lift them. So getting to moving these dollars around so we can get at those heaviest subsidies and that group that's the most disenfranchised, I think would be really important for us to prioritize.
Now, I will acknowledge that at the URA, we hear development phone calls, and we do not see the stabilization need the way a lot of you do.
If you set up a hotline, you would definitely put that on a billboard and see what your volume is.
So what would that look like, Adrian, do you think, for this allocation? Would it just still be labeled housing stabilization, and then we kind of figure out that we have a different use that may look a little different than the program we constructed already?
I think it certainly could look just like that. And I think having conversations with the Housing Authority and DHS is one of those steps. I think having conversations with economic development, both city and county, is another one of those steps. But how could we really leverage these resources for the maximum impact? Mm-hmm. Flexible dollars for rental assistance are very hard to come by, and I'd love to see us blow that up to the extent possible.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but I like to see more collaboration with not just, the bigger entities, but also some of the smaller agencies that are providing these same services. And how can folks work together, maybe on a state level, to attract more resources, not just for the big guys, but for the small guys.
But with a DHS partnership, you
Right.
have the small guys too. So if you used a mechanism like a DHS,
Right.
they
Right.
have partnerships with very small entities that may
Yeah.
only have 3 or 4 staff.
Right.
They have that contracting ability. If DHS was managing that through their existing system, then we get more for our buck because the infrastructure's there. You don't have to duplicate it. So I agree
Right.
with you wholeheartedly. I think those little guys, it's a lot easier to touch them with systems that already exist than trying to create a whole new level of system that they then have to try to adjust to. What does the URA want? If I already have a contract with United Way or with DHS, I could just plug it in there and then I don't have to create a new infrastructure for dollars.
Dollars directly to those other entities, which would cause
Do anything we want.
issue. They're not a nonprofit.
But there's already mechanisms. You could use their mechanism. So again, I agree with you. I think we just want to try to, it's not that we want the big entities necessarily. We just want the power of economies of scale in some kind of way.
And I agree. And I mean, maybe leveraging those agencies to attract more dollars that can help everybody.
Exactly.
To essentially meet the needs of the people, because that's really the focus. Less about who's getting the dollars, but that these folks are being helped. But how to work together to attract more dollars and leverage these dollars to do that. But once the dollars come in, that it reaches multiple organizations and not just a few. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
This is a rabbit hole we could go down. I have a couple more questions, but I don't know if we want to spend time working all of that out at the table today.
Yeah, I mean, let me just explain the timeline, and then it's up to you how you all want to move forward with it. But, what our thought was that we would get to a plan today that people would temporarily approve, kind of preliminary plan, and then we would post it online for the next month and have, we'll talk to you about the housing event on April 30th. And talk about it at that event and then come back 2 days later with the final vote. But that would give the public a month to weigh in on it on our website. Or if people want to go back and think about these things, we could. I don't want to delay final vote next month because we need to get to council. So we could do a final vote without a preliminary vote if you want to, but I do want to get something on our website relatively soon. So my thoughts and goals for today was for you to look at how these things compare. If people want to make a motion to go with the median or to go with staff recommendation or to make any changes, that's why Evan has that 4th column. We can kind of combine the two or do whatever people would like to do right now would be the preferred scenario.
Well, just a few things that come to mind when looking at the staff recommendations. So we already spoke to the landlord assistance program. If there's another program and dollars coming, then I'm okay with leaving that aside for now. But the Tangle title I don't see, or estate planning, necessarily in your recommendations, and the other is the one of the biggest things I heard from the community meetings was the homeowner assistance program, and the need for that. So that being lowered, I'm not sure that makes sense. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see jumping out, other than ensuring that we include some dollars for this Tangle Title estate planning component.
The logic for lowering it was a couple things. One is thinking about Jamie's slides. There's definitely a difference in the number of renters and the number of homeowners at those levels. So we're not 100% sure the demand for the HAP program. So that was a bit of an unknown to us. And secondly, and this should not be, too much of a hindrance, but we do need to figure out from a staffing capacity, and not just URA staff, but contractors and the subcontractors that the program administrators are going to be using and so forth. I mean, the construction field is kind of crazy right now, and there's a shortage. So we wanted to see how that worked out as well, which was the suggestion for reducing it just a little bit, not a lot, but it was just our suggestion. And I also, understand if people want to keep that at a higher level.
I think capacity is a concern, but I wouldn't be worried about demand. I mean, with all our senior population and our home ownership rates, and even if people aren't cost burdened, their house might be falling down around them, so.
Right.
Because we don't have the money necessarily on the street yet, right? We're just getting under contract with those guys.
Yeah, so an update on the housing assistance program as of today. Draft contracts have been circulated to the program administrators. They are reviewing them. We're hopeful to be under contract with them within a week. We also have the application to consumer in a semifinal state. And so as soon as we're under contract within a week with the administrators, we will be releasing that application. So by the middle of April, the third week of April, it should be fully up and running.
So I think, at least when I did my allocation estimates, that was really the kind of thing that guided it. Like, a lot of it was that the money just isn't on the street yet. It wasn't really about the relative need or demand for the program so much as just having all that money on the street at the same time in one program when other programs could use the funds. So while I think that the HAP program is critically important, I just think that we're going to have a lot of money on the street at the same time.
If just going off the staff recommendation number plus what we did last year, that's 4.125 million that's going to be on the street this year, right?
Which is a crazy amount of money.
I'm not sure if that, would, be a reason to reduce it, because there'd be money on the street from both years, because really that's the, situation with all the programs.
Sure.
So, yeah, I'm not sure that logic really makes sense.
About absorption, though. Can we absorb $4 million in HAP?
In small pieces.
Take a ride with me through the Hill, Home,
Hazelwood.
and Bell
Come on.
Silver.
Yeah.
And trust me,
Yeah. I don't think the limiting factor is the demand.
Right, it's not the demand.
It's
capacity.
Yeah, it's capacity of the service providers, it's capacity of the contractors, and it's a labor sort of market, right?
Also,
definitely not
yet to see
demand.
whether the homeowners are going to sign up for the 30-year restriction.
Right. That's another one.
I also think our community meetings were really disproportionately homeowners. I mean, the East Liberty one was like 90% homeowners, and that our neighborhood's not 90% homeowners. So I think it's a really important program, but I'm also worried about capacity.
Yeah, I guess I think about, if you look at all the programs, most of them are kind of rental skewed. There's two home ownership kind of focused ones.
Three.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true. But this one I think is a huge problem, just across the city. So yeah, I don't know about that. And there were a lot of homeowners there, but there are also a lot of renters there. And I think we're thinking about affordable housing. We're thinking about homeless prevention. But we got to think about existing homeowners. And I think this is the only one that really focuses on existing homeowners. Everything else is for new homeowners. So yeah, that's, that was a resounding thing. Every north, south, east, west, more than any other line item. So I just don't think we should ignore that.
Joanna asked a question at one of the previous meetings related to, there are minimums related to AMIs, but we could do a little bit more front loading in different categories. I actually like the fact that the staff recommendations have a little bit more in the 30% category, because again, I think that's really important, and I think that those are probably a lot of the folks that did not come out to the public meetings, because they're just incredibly under-resourced. So I do think that it is important on every level to make sure that that's a group that we have a lot of focus on.
Sonia's point. Give her the credit. Sonia, wasn't that your point? That we could front load to the low?
I didn't make that point today, but I may have.
I'm sorry, I was on the phone. I thought it was you doing it. But I do think that that's a critical component of what we're doing. And those are the resources that aren't going to be available in other pots of money.
If we go back to the median and kind of just add a little of the new money in ways that this conversation informed, then we could be at more of a consensus.
That's fine. If you want to do that, if you want to look at the median, and the median, because when we took the median, the math doesn't work out exactly right. We're under by 0.57.
When we're talking about median, how many spreadsheets did you
11.
get? 11 out of 17.
Yes.
Okay.
So we
Which I
can
think
make
is another issue for the governance committee.
Yeah, I also think that, I worry a little bit, and that maybe it's something that, I know I sound like I'm hammering on administration, but is there a way to do some of this demonstration and other things out of that, since we're running kind of 2 years at $1 million each? We're probably not going to spend it all. And is there a way that we can set some of this aside so we can do some of that other stuff out of there? And, looking at how we might accomplish that as a way, we're not cutting the other stuff that we think we need to do, but we're also maybe giving ourselves some flexibility to respond, or we're able to do some new things.
That was the case for the demonstration dollars, which has now been reabsorbed by something else. But that was the thinking, and I think it should be a separate line item.
Once we have these programs up and running and we have a better idea of staff time and what the admin costs are, anything not needed out of that million, can be reprogrammed somehow.
Yeah, but do we have to go back to city council? I think we do. So should we take a stab at it and maybe make that as part of the allocation now? And then hopefully we had a pretty close guess. And if we need to adjust it because, hey, it really cost a lot more to do the inspections and we had a lot more demand than we thought we were going to have, a lot more inspections, we try to figure that out at that time and make an educated guess right now as to what we think that's going to be. Maybe we don't have to go back to city council twice.
It's tricky because of additional contracts as well. Like the first year we had the large HRNA contract. We know that the needs assessment will be needing to be updated at some point. We don't know the other contracts, so I'm just not prepared to have that conversation today, probably.
I know that we want every one of these dollars humanly possible on the street, absolutely, but I really don't feel like that administrative level is grotesque or inflated in any kind of way.
It's
I
actually
suspect that-
insufficient
Well,
to cover
so-
what the URA has to deliver to do this level of work that you're seeing, because it's not just the folks sitting in the corner over there, it's the entire organization putting its full thrust behind getting this program administered in ways that probably don't even occur to us.
Exactly. So I don't feel compelled in any kind of way to really adjust that administrative budget. I think that it is appropriate. I think that it makes sense in a variety of ways. So I don't feel compelled to touch that in any kind of way. I do feel compelled to have some level of flex demonstration, additional program line item in the budget, even if that was the 0.57 that's missing from from the total. But I do think that that is a really smart adjustment to make and gives us some flexibility to do some of the interesting and innovative things we've wanted to. So I would definitely propose, whether we call it additional program or demonstration or a little bit of both, I think those are critical. And again, I'm not feeling particularly uncomfortable with the administrative rate. If there are dollars that can be reclaimed in any way as we go forward, I think we want to be able to do that. But I don't feel that that's unreasonable.
Given the fact that we're in startup, we keep feeling pushed to got to get the allocation plan done by such and such date. And so we don't really have time to land the plane and think strategically. So if we don't earmark dollars for when we do have that opportunity in that time, we're going to sort of landlock ourselves, for lack of a better term, into some things, and we're not going to be able to do the strategic things that emerge. So I think that breaking that out, knowing that we can use it for rental gap or something else if that need comes, but having those flexible dollars there to give us time to be strategic, I think is critical.
There was a comment, and thanks for the clarity for those that provided it, around the emergency, situations. Maybe this line item could be demonstration/emergency dollars that were flexible to kind of go both ways, should those situations arise.
I mean, what we could do is we could have a 6-program of source with, we could create small 2-page guidelines or something that just talks about any emergency in any of these activities. So if there is a housing stabilization need all of a sudden or something like that, it could go there probably without having to be reallocated or go back to council.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it, kind of just have it as an emergency space.
An emergency
Writ
program.
large, and then also the space for demonstration where we identified the new opportunities that have happened within this year that we never thought about, that, there's another issue.
An opportunity line in the opportunity fund.
Within sort of certain guidelines.
No, with a 2-pager.
parameters.
So I think within the parameters of whatever you write up for the emergency process as well as for demonstration process.
Okay. So I heard Adrian say the 570 that wasn't allocated on the median approach. Do people like that? Go ahead, Mark.
Just a question about the other thing that runs with the legislation at 50% has to be permanent affordability, and like we've got different grids up there, and year one, we're concerned about it, but also it's kind of this rolling average. But if we can also understand how we're doing as it relates to that, because that is something that we can't ignore.
That's a really good point.
And then the second part of it, and maybe this is, Adrian, I was just struck by the meeting that we had with the providers about the need that's out there, and what we're providing is, this is going to be gone in a couple of months. And is that enough? Even talking, if we did this differently to leverage money, is what we're talking about in that housing stabilization program enough funding to start to really make a much bigger impact if we do it differently?
Is any of this money,
Well,
honestly, making that real needle move? I don't know that I would say that it can. What I do know about these funds is it's the level of flexibility for a group of folks who are barred from other service systems. I don't think we know, and again, maybe someone's done some research on this. I looked to Chuck in the background. I don't think that we know what that demand is for those folks. When I did my allocation, I actually put some rental assistance in for the 80% AMI folks, because that is a unique group that may have a crisis situation and get into trouble, because just because you're at 80% AMI doesn't mean that you are burning money in your driveway. So, those folks are in need too, and those folks are typically going to be completely barred from other kinds of programming. So I think it's hard for us to say which group this is impacting out of the large group. I think we have the big numbers, but we don't know how that stratifies down. I think $750,000 is impactful for the group that's being impacted, and certainly is going to prevent a lot of evictions from happening, which is going to be great for all of us. It doesn't necessarily impact the long-term affordability, which some of these other strategies do. So I think we're pushing, in the different funds, we're pushing problems in different directions, as we do in the systems overall. So I don't know that I can speak intelligently to that. I think it's not enough, but I also know that there are other resources available in other systems for this particular component. And if there was more affordable rental housing created, this group would also be impacted in a positive way.
What about putting like 70,000 of the 500 into the Tangled title stuff out of that, and then the 500 into the emergency demonstration?
Can do that. Right now, Tangled Title is part of the homeowner assistance program.
It's coming out
It's
of that.
written into those guidelines, and so we can also take a portion of the homeowner assistance program number and set it aside for Tangled Title, which is what we did this past year.
And that's actually an elevated number for the homeowner assistance.
Oh, it's
in
not just the
median.
homeowners, right? So the renters need eviction prevention.
And that one came out of housing stabilization program this year. I don't know if that's the best approach, but,
Okay,
but that's
so
how
they're
it's done.
coming out of those things.
I think it is housing stabilization. I mean eviction. They're kind of one and the same. Yeah, I think it makes sense for the homeowner assistance program and the Tangled Title to be together. At first, I was thinking it should be a part of the URA admin, but since this is connected to homeowners, it probably makes more sense to be in that HAP program. However, going back to my other point earlier about this being one of the hugest needs, I think we should look at allocating more dollars towards that, especially now knowing that Tangled Title is coming out of that line item. And what was it last year?
Well, last year we set aside $300,000 for Tangled Title, but Neighborhood Legal Services applied for, I think, 140, and that's the only application we've gotten. So the rest of that is still sitting there.
Yeah, so maybe if we move at least 70,000, but probably more, maybe 170, to that HAP line item, to taking into consideration the Tangled Title issue. But something I think should be moved there.
Just for
70
clarity.
or 170.
Just for clarity, the housing, the 140 was they asked for, they spent that, and is that already done and out the door? And
No,
then they identified the
no.
need?
We just got approval for their contract. They have not spent it yet.
Okay, but are they inferring that they will be able to spend that and more? I'm just asking in regard to kind of the natural tension between what we
Yeah.
Right.
know to be issues and, again, the capacity of the groups to be able to respond to the issue, right? Like, we know we need a lot of housing, but it takes 4 years to do a 9%, right? So in the same way, Tangled Title, we know it's a huge wealth issue, but if only one group is applying and they only want 100,000,
Right.
is that because they can't do any more, or is that because that's the scale of the issue
And they
that we
did,
find
I think,
ourselves?
10 homes last year? Because over the last 18 months, they've done 10.
Yeah.
Because they piloted it through the Tangled Title project.
Title
Neighborhood
takes
Legal.
longer than the eviction. Now
Yeah.
you can do.
Yeah, which is how they based their request, was off of those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
So we do have extra money from 2018 that if someone else came in wanting to do Tangled Title work, we still have that money there for them.
And being that those line items are combined, those dollars can still be used to help homeowners repair their homes, right?
Right. The way we think it's going to flow is when Sharon gets an application from a homeowner for a homeowner assistance program, and she looks at their application and realizes that their name is not on the deed, instead of sending that application to one of the providers like Hilltop Alliance or something, she will then send it to Neighborhood Legal Services.
I wasn't here last time, but I spoke on the phone about a big situation that happens. When that happens is estate tax. I don't know if we got a clear direction on how that would be handled. So in that scenario, when the deed's not in their name and it needs to be transferred, and we can use these dollars to facilitate that transfer, oftentimes there's an estate tax issue. Can these dollars be helped to remedy that situation?
I have to look at the minutes. When I just read the minutes, the answer's in there. Neighborhood Legal Services answered it. I can't remember what they said. So look
Okay.
at the
They
minutes.
had indicated that was going back on the client. That was
that
the
what they said?
one item that the client would be responsible for. All of the other costs would be absorbed, but that would be on the client, was what they had shared in the.
Okay. So you're basically saying what happens if the client can't pay for it?
Correct. And then if maybe there's some other city mechanism combined with this that can help that, but if we're not helping that situation, then we're going to turn a lot of people away.
It's a good question. We can talk to Neighborhood Legal
I don't
Services about
recall
it.
the magnitude the example that they had, I don't remember the magnitude of that tax being.
They really described it as a
Yeah.
minimal issue,
Yeah.
and that the fees that people were looking at were only a few $100s, and I understand that that's significant, but they said that there were also payment plans for that.
And they also said that most of these bypass the estate tax through Orphans Court and how they do it.
Through what?
In the minutes.
Court. Through Orphans Court.
You know, that they are going through, if they're not going through probate, they probably don't have an estate tax liability. And that's how they actually do it, is to not run it through a probate process, but take it through Orphans Court.
Yeah, that's what, it's in the minutes as well.
So I really liked the emergency funds in the rental cap program, and I'm a little concerned if we combine it with the demonstration dollars. Like if we spend the demonstration dollars and then there's an emergency, I don't know what we do. So is there some way to have a little bit more flexibility in the rental gap program if that happens?
Found it, that it wasn't a possibility.
Yeah, I think also maybe that could be done through some of the rules of kind of up to what level of money in demonstration,
Yeah.
what constitutes an emergency. I think we're
Yeah,
going
we
to have
have
to
to
have a
define that
number of
stuff.
those kind of specifics, right? Like what does it mean immediate eviction within 30 to 60 days in a neighborhood, or demonstration up to this amount that does this? So I think that's where we can get the clarity and kind of get the structure so we can understand how we're operating those funds, whether they're just all in a rental or they're combined.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't confine the flexibility to a pool we could entirely use for something else. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it also has to do with like how much we RFP at any given time and
Right.
if there's any left.
As we're talking about the rental gap line item as well, if we're going to base the, I guess, plan for public comment off the median values, and really, I guess this applies across all of them, but if we want to talk about the income bands at all, because to the comment on the staff recommendations in terms of putting the lion's share of the rental gap monies in the 30% units versus the other splits, and obviously if we make a change to the way the median values are shown, you know, that'll have sort of a cascading effect, and we'll need to think about, you know, changing that, so. I don't know if there's thoughts there.
Were there two programs where there was going to be, where we didn't expect to be, I mean, it's all guesstimates at this point, but we didn't really expect to be out of funds until like first quarter of next year?
Yeah, the HAP
Yeah. And then-
program,
I feel like there was
first
another
quarter
one.
of next year. I mean, that might have been down payment. If
Down
we
payment.
close down payments at the current, if the demand for down payment is the current rate, it'll take about a year. It'll be about March of next year.
And I think that's why many of our values are all lower across the board on that than in 2018 for those two programs. It was really a function of how much money is going to be on the street at one time. Though again, this is a program where we know there's demonstrated need.
But I mean, just real quick on the demand, like yesterday, Fatina and Sharon spoke at an event. How many realtors were there? Yeah, I mean, so it's possible we're underestimating the demand because when the program gets out and more realtors know about it and banks, I mean, Sharon's also of the 10 or so applications she's received, it's came from maybe 3 banks. So as the banks, you know, start to learn about it as well. So my estimates, especially in that first meeting, may have been, you know, a little bit long if I wasn't considering the fact that it could speed up tremendously.
I mean, yeah, May through September, right? There's likely going to be more purchasing activity on the real estate market, and presumably there will be an uptick in the demand for the program.
Yeah, we're going into our last 30 minutes, and some folks have to leave in 10 minutes. It'd be great to have a whiteboard for these things with the grid on it, but, so if maybe to try to move forward on it, we've got the programs. If we're looking at this, we're talking about adjusting the staff recommendation numbers and creating some demo emergency funding.
The median.
The median numbers, okay. So we're having an additional line item to the existing programs that's demonstration/emergency. And how much are we, what number is going to get filled into that line item? But we're hearing that there might be, some folks might want to put more into the homeowner assistance program.
And also, just based on the conversation we just had, I don't know if you want to think about the down payment as well and keeping it at the level it is this year.
The draft, right? So we could just put the 570 in the emergency demonstration with the median numbers and put it to the community, right? Get some more feedback, process.
Well, I mean, I'd like to
come back.
I'd like to leave today with something everybody here
Yeah, I
is
feel like that's
comfortable
punting
with.
a bit, yeah.
If when we put it on the website, if it's overwhelming, like if we get 100, responses that say, "Oh, you have to increase such and such," then we will bring that information back. But if it's a mixed bag, I'd like to have something that you guys are all comfortable
If we
with right
haven't
now.
spent down all the money from the 2018 allocation, how essential is it that we double down in those areas where there's still, there's still money? And this is the we're not gonna, probably not gonna spend all of 2019 allocation either, so that demonstration bucket gives us the flexibility. Should something expend out more quickly, the flexible program guidelines will allow us to deploy where we need to.
Only thing about that is that the demonstration dollars are pulling from and lowering other line items that have proven themselves to be important.
For the
But they still
median.
have, but they
in
still
this
have
scenario.
money in them.
Well, I'm looking at this 570, and that essentially a large part of it came from the homeowners assistance program. So, there and the rental gap. So it's just kind of like
Homeowner assistance is actually larger here than the averages.
I'm looking at from 2018's allocation to 2019. So all I'm saying is maybe at least 70,000 of that 570
Right.
go to HAP, and then maybe just make it an even 500.
That might,
for the
I could
emergency.
support that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could support that.
And then put the rest of it into the demonstration, emergency /flex, however we want to frame that, but that excess goes into there as a way to respond to things, maybe fill hole if we run out of money that quickly, we might want to put more in if we think it's making that impact. But anyway.
And if some of the money's not getting used in 2018, maybe we can see where it's moving the quickest and move it.
I was gonna say, that seems like it would be important for the community conversation is what's still on the table, plus this. Because that gives the full picture of what's happening over the next year. Just this does not, and just that does not.
Agreed. Agreed. That's what I know would have been helpful for me to say, all right, this is where everything is gonna land in 2019 based on what's still in the remaining buckets.
But is that a fair way to look at it? Because some programs just rolled out where others were out 6 months ago. So it's like part of the reason why it's looking like there's a lot more is because we haven't even signed contracts yet. But once it's signed, it's gonna be a flurry. So I don't know if we should base it on what's left, but really base it on the need more so than what's left.
But I think what's left is what's going to address the need, and we have another allocation year coming up upon us, and so we don't want people to feel like, hey, 2019 didn't put any money in this bucket, but that doesn't mean that the needs aren't going to be addressed with the resources that are still remaining in that bucket in the year 2019. That way, if there are other priorities, folks feel like they have the flexibility to say, well, I do want to see something happen over there because I know for 2019 that money is going out. I think it would undermine their ability to make the best decision and think about new opportunities if we don't do it that way.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that's the intent of the 500K. I just don't want to set the precedent of making decisions based on what we perceive, because there's monies left, but this just hasn't kicked off yet. It's really not saying because the need's not that vast. Yeah.
But I think that is overlooking the fact that we are already a quarter into this year and we have some programs that don't have dollars on the street. And so doubling down on dollars that are already on the street in programs where we don't have any clue what the absorption is going to be is probably short-sighted. And maybe we wait until we have more data and determine if we need to reallocate rather than setting money aside that we don't know is going to be used in the next 3 quarters.
My mentality is a little bit different. I'm not as motivated to just throw dollars on the street. I'm more.
I think every one of these programs though is needed.
Sure.
So it's not like it's not gonna.
I understand, but I'm just saying, like, originally we wanted to not just do it the way that it was done before, but be creative, and we just rushed. So we're just keep rushing. And I'm like, at some point, we just got to slow down and focus on what we're hearing and address that, as opposed to, hey, there's still dollars left in that line item. Let's put it over here. It's like, no, let's dedicate
but
the
we could do a
dollars to
reallocation
the biggest
plan.
need.
I mean, we could
But that's what I'm saying.
go to a midpoint and say, all right, we want to reconvene and talk about where things landed and explore a midpoint reallocation opportunity
Down
that
payment
could
is
be
being
more
absorbed way
strategic
faster
based
than
on based on the facts on the ground. To try to do it all now, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen. We may be able to get to August or September and say, hey, let's land the plane and let's do some analysis.
Also, just as, reality check, we're going to be doing this very same thing again in about 4 or 5 months.
For 2020.
So, for the 2020 allocation. And it just, I agree, I don't like rushing through this stuff, but we're sort of forced in some ways to do it. We got to make the best guesses as to what we think is going to happen. But we can, if we see that, hey, we really underestimated how many homeowners were going to be using this repair program, that we could also, we could do a reallocation of this or of last year's, but we also have that opportunity in September or thereabouts to actually just say, hey, we missed the boat, or we now have a lot more information about what's going on with these things. But again, I agree that we should put more money into that program because I think it's going to be popular. It's also one of those things that's going to get into every council district, which is really important for us to keep the $10 million a year coming and hopefully get more for this kind of work. But we're now at 15 minutes to go.
So just real quick, I know you all need to go. So just trying to get to some final numbers real quick here. So what I'm hearing is the 3.75 for the rental gap that was your median. Everyone seems like they're comfortable with sticking with that. Is that an assumption? Okay. So we're sticking with 3.75. Okay. And then the housing stabilization program, do people want to stick with your median of 0.8?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, check. Because one thing that your median, I was just noticing this, your median is not going as high as it can on the 80% AMI totals. So
We could put a little bit of like
Into the homeowners.
well, you
homeowner
could like in
assistance.
down payment or something.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is to my comment earlier about reallocating within the income bands, but keeping the totals the same.
Yeah.
Is if we're looking at the 0.57, that's total, right? And that's not sort of within each of the bands. So if we're saying that we're going to put 0.7 towards HAP and 0.5 towards demonstration, then in total that's what it has to be, right? And we can reallocate within the bands. If we're short on 80, then tip up HAP there, and turn the knobs down on some other ones. But the math is the math. Right?
So do you want HAP to be that tipping
Based on the
point?
public comment, I think that we shouldn't be eliminating anything in 80% AMI because the argument was that you have a lot of homeowners who are on that cliff who
Agreed.
can't get support.
Yeah.
So
And to that point, I mean, the other thing I would say in the graphic that we had on some of the slides sort of illustrated that point. It's 80% or below. It's 50% or below. It's 30% or below. So if it is allocated to 80 or 50, it does provide some of that flexibility sort of downstream, right? Whereas if we only allocate it to where the cap is, that we lose that. So.
Madam Chair, I'm just not going to, I'm going to register an abstention for this vote and the votes prior, because I'm waiting for something from our law department to come back.
Okay.
So I know I'm okay to vote on some stuff.
Okay. And I should also say for the record, since we took roll call, Teresa Kale Smith, Derek Tillman, and Sonia Tillman came in. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so am I hearing, well, you guys need to motion, but, but it sounds like you're wanting the demonstration money, the 0.57 to be reallocated in whatever income band it needs to be so that we hit those amounts in the income bands. And I'm hearing the HAP and the demonstration being how you want us to do that. Is that correct?
I thought, unless I'm mistaken, I thought we were going to move 70K of the 570 to HAP and then 500K in demonstration.
Is that what people want? Okay.
Yeah.
$70 is going to the 80% AMI category. Is that correct?
Can't do the math fast
Okay.
enough in my head, but we will hit the 25%.
Okay.
Someone
We're
want to
good at-
make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
A second.
Okay, but we got to word it for Gloria over here. So
So 3.75 million rental gap. Looking at the median values, housing stabilization program, 0.8 million. Down payment closing cost assistance, 0.5 million. For
HAP, it looks like according to Evan's calculations, 2.20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2.2.
From
Yeah.
median, 70,000 to 250,000, 320.
So what, I'm sorry, what's
2.2.
2.2 million. For sale development, 1.25 million, and then emergency / demonstration, 500,000.
Mm-hmm.
And admin.
Up to $1 million.
Thank you. Up to 1 million.
Up to 1 million. Okay. Okay. So he made the motion. Someone needs a second.
Majestic.
A second.
Okay, Majestic. I'm sorry. All those in favor?
Excuse me, this is Val. It's very difficult to hear by conference call. Can you please repeat the motion? That would be Jessica, since you're closest to the mic.
The motion is for the 2019 allocation plan that the advisory board is taking, basically it's a preliminary recommendation, contingent upon a public review process over the next month. So we'll be back in May for final, and the preliminary recommendation is for 2019 allocation plan, the rental gap program to be funded at 3.75 million, the housing stabilization program to be funded at 0.8 million, the down payment closing cost assistance program to be funded at 0.5 million, the homeowner assistance program to be funded at 2.2 million, and the for sale development program to be funded at 1.25 million, and to create a sixth program called demonstration / emergency program with guidelines to be written and funded at the amount of 500,000.
Thank you.
Before we vote, do we want to amend that to allow staff, I'm sorry, to, in terms of making sure the income bands sort of shake out, because it's like 51, 25, 24.
Yes.
All right.
You got it? Is
We
it?
did it. It's
Got
50,
it, okay.
25.
This is it.
There's 0.2 and the 30 for demonstration, 0.12, so 120,000 in the
Okay.
Okay. So we took the vote, right?
No, we
No.
we did not take the vote.
everybody's
I'm sitting here waiting.
Everyone's waiting with bated breath.
Okay, everyone in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anyone abstain?
Abstention.
Teresa. Okay, thank you. As people are walking out, please note that big event, April 30th. Brand new city URA Housing Authority building at 412 Boulevard of the Allies. Please, please, please come. I'm going to be reaching out to most of you about it. I'd also like one or two of you to help present this plan at the meeting. But there's going to be over 15, probably closer to 20 other agencies there. Housing Authority is going to be there to talk about Section 8 public housing, their homeownership program, all their programs, and then United Way and Department of Human Services and a lot of the nonprofits are all going to be there. So it's really going to be a resource for people, but the mayor is speaking, and we are going to, talk about this plan at this event. Yes,
Are
Joanna.
the providers that we've funded going to be there
Yes.
to share?
Yes.
And they're going to help promote it and everything?
I love this idea, and I love to make sure we do it across the city, move it around.
Yes, absolutely. It's downtown this time, just because it was central, and we're looking at potentially providing, the housing authority is looking at potentially even providing transportation for folks, so. Yes.
Just a point of clarification related to the comment that was made in public comments at the front. The motion that I made last month was about making sure that we have turnout and doing the door knocking, the community outreach around the city to turn people out to this that can benefit and make connections with hopefully providers that we've funded and do all sorts of good things. But I think that there's other things that we're getting included in that 5,000, like catering and other stuff that wasn't the intent of my motion, was to limit. I think it's going to take all of 5,000 to
Just to
get
do
the
the
turnout.
catering.
Well, yeah, I don't know what catering costs, but I know that it's, I haven't been
It's a
at
lot of
door.
people. If we want 200 people, we want to feed people.
Yeah, so I'm just want to be sure that I wasn't cutting off, monies that if we need to spend more than 5,000 to do the whole event, that isn't what I was proposing was a budget for the whole event. What's the real number need to be, and do we need to vote on that, or is that something that you
Can't we
guys can
cover the
decide?
cost of the catering?
I mean,
what
it is a Housing Opportunity Fund sponsored event.
Okay.
We were looking at other events that have been similar, that have happened recently, that the URA has participated in, and the cost of food, outreach, and everything for those events have actually been under the $5,000 budget. So I'm just saying that it seems like to run an event like this, the cost should not exceed $5,000.
I think we're trying to look at turnout a little differently, which is one reason that we're doing this, right? And it's not a typical event. And I'm not sure if it was the kind of event. It was the kind of event where people were fed and things, like not like our meetings.
Yes, I'm welcome to have maybe a conversation with a smaller group of advisory board members interested in this issue to talk it through. Staff has already spent a large amount of time on the logistics of this event. So I would like to talk about what a reasonable number of hours for outreach in terms of getting people to attend the event might be. But compared to other events of this size with this turnout, a budget of 5,000 seems sufficient.
Well, I think this is a part of a larger issue that was already discussed about community outreach in general, and we shouldn't just be looking at it around this event. There's outreach of this whole program. So I don't know if we ever arrived at a situation with subcontracting with the community group to really provide outreach for everything, especially from a grassroots perspective. So I think we should be looking at it holistically and not just this one individual event.
I think it's about the intent of the emotion, the motion, because like we didn't think we were voting on a budget for the event. We thought we were voting on.
I just think that having watched what happened with last year's turnout to different events, it's different door knocking and getting folks to and from this sort of thing, and I think that's who we're trying to target. It's not just the same folks that show up at a lot of events like this. It's really trying to get the folks that we didn't touch very well with the community outreach that we did. We didn't have a lot of renters at those things. That's what I'm hoping we see, that we're targeting folks that weren't out at the community meetings that we were doing, that we're making sure that we get a large turnout from those folks. And I think that
You're doing calling, text banking, social media, picking people up.
Can the advisory board please give me an idea of how many hours they think that is?
It's not just the hours, it's also the technology and the other stuff to go out there and do it. I would just say if you guys can cover the 5,000 I thought was sufficient when I made the motion, but if catering, I didn't realize we were talking about catering and things like that. That isn't the motion that I made. So if you guys can do the catering or do that piece of it, I think the 5,000 is sufficient to get the outreach and get the turnout. And it will have a couple hundred folks that are at this that, aren't aware of what we're doing.
I would need to know how many hours of outreach is happening and what the hourly rate is.
Yeah, I mean, working with the organization to determine like what they think is appropriate, and we've authorized up to $5,000 for that.
But please keep in mind that the previous contract that we had for this type of work last year included catering and all expenses. So that is why the contract was assumed to include catering and all expenses, especially when similar events have actually been done for yet less. And when this one event is consistent with the catering, with the contract amount that was done last year for 5 events. If you do the math, it's consistent.
I guess I was confused because I thought it was like, we haven't had renters, so let's bring these folks in to help first renters. I didn't think it was like, we haven't had renters, so let's bring these folks in to coordinate to pay for the food. And it was just how it was framed.
Okay. And this is for Pittsburgh United with all of our things, and we're going to subcontract with CJ Consulting and make sure that we pay her what she's worth. So we have the stated contracted rate is $50 an hour, which is less than usual. The estimated numbers of hours is 120 for the month. We have like 3 weeks left now. 20 for outreach. Outreach to us is canvassing, door knocking, those sorts of things. 10 for promotion. That's the text banking, social media, those sorts of things. And 5 for event planning, because we had an agreement for us to look at the content and make sure that it's palatable for the demographic that we want. With the work beginning no later than Monday, April 8th, 2019. If we included printing and catering for the caterer that we work with would be at least $2,000 for 200 people and delivery fees. So that would be most of our budget. And we would like to have Crystal at the rate that she wants to be at. So that's our quote, which is less than normal.
Number is? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. Okay. I'll go slower. I talk fast.
No, just what's the total? What's the total?
The total is the 5,000. It's actually 6,000. But we said because of the relationship and because we want to have people get the resources that we would work with the 5,000.
So
this is the email we sent yesterday.
And that's for how many hours? For how many hours?
120.
And doesn't.
And
include,
I broke it down.
And it doesn't include catering.
No.
Okay, that's fine. So again,
or printing.
My thought is that especially as we're looking at this allocation, we need to be including, them in a yearly outreach, and not just, so, and that can probably definitely be a part of the admin, that really be a yearly contract for outreach for all events and not just this one event.
Eric, we did talk about that, having a separate RFQ for all the outreach.
Okay. I think the time is now to kind of make that happen.
But there is going to be an RFQ issued for outreach, and consistent with everything the URA does via an RFQ.
Okay.
Like I said, we have conducted events at the URA for $3,000 to have that many people, So my suggestion would be to cut the hours of outreach in half so that it would be more a 2,000 budget for outreach and 3,000 for catering and printing and everything else.
Well, then we
to
might
be
end up with the same kind
consistent
of
with
meetings we
URA.
just had.
I'm sorry, Teresa?
Then we might just end up with the same types of meetings we just had.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say you might not get that deep outreach that you want. Canvassing and door knocking, I know people might not think of what it takes to get people from certain demographics to come out downtown and to get these resources, but it takes this amount. This is
That's
the
not
limited
a lot.
amount.
That's not a lot of money. So I'm opposed to reducing for that work to anything lower than that. I'm actually advocating for it to be higher than that and to be looked at on a yearly perspective. But as it relates to that one event, it doesn't even make sense to try to get it lower. Especially if we're trying to have food, we really need to be talking about how much more do they need, not trying to cut it. Yeah.
With one,
Wait.
Okay.
Hang on just for a second. Is there, Sonia was
I was just gonna say,
something.
with one fewer week, because you had budgeted a month, do you think you would still do 120 hours?
Yeah,
Okay, you just compress it.
yeah. Especially because Crystal's
Can we
gonna be
get the
out
food
on the
donated?
street door knocking. I mean, like, it's not gonna be outreach, like, social media is separate. We have to run a text bank and we have to have staff to do that as well. So this is a low figure.
I have to run. Are we voting on anything?
What's Bettina gonna say?
It is.
Scheduling, and we are all staff members are going out into the community to also promote the event. So in this situation, event, it's not just solely on Pittsburgh United to put this event together. A lot of staff time is going to be
Which
is
then-
exactly
then
what I was
that-
saying.
That's what I made the motion for, is to spend the 5,000 to contract with Pittsburgh United to do the outreach. For this event, to turn folks out that we haven't heard from.
But once again, their contract last year was
I
19,000
didn't
for
vote.
5 meetings inclusive of
I
catering.
wasn't voting. What I heard was 5,000 was the number it was going to take to do the outreach. That's the motion that I made, and it's gotten contorted into paying for the whole event. And I'm not a party planner, and don't know what catering costs, but I know it's not free if it's going to get catered. That wasn't part of that was not the intent of the motion. The intent was, I'm really concerned we have not heard from a lot of low-income renters that most of these funds are targeted towards. We heard a lot from homeowners, and I appreciate that feedback, but we got to turn those folks out at some point in time before we get the final allocation plan going to council. That's what I made the motion for. I don't know how everybody else interpreted that voted for it, but it wasn't about catering the event. It was about just doing the outreach. And I really do have to go. I'm meeting. I have folks at a group that I've got to have a site visit with at 11:30. But I just wanted to bring that up. That the motion that I made was to do the community outreach, not to pay for everything else with the event.
I agree.
And the motion also was for an hourly rate that would be reviewed and determined for a
Correct.
number of hours. So it seems like we just need to do some more due diligence on their contract to make sure that it is consistent with industry standards and that the amount of time listed is what is needed for one event.
Also take into consideration there's 3 weeks left.
Right. If we don't start now, we're not going, we
And
can't
if
do
we're
it.
also shooting for 200 people,
That's-
125, 150, we need time
gets
to
harder
get
every
to
day.
get
It gets
that to
harder
those
every
people.
day.
So the shorter time we have, the harder it's going to be for us to do what we are intended to do. That's in our contract.
What are we looking at? I think we kind of understand the situation. Can we vote? I don't think there's anything else to deliberate about. It's let's make it happen so they can get to work.
Is there a vote?
There is
I
an
don't think there's a
emotion on
vote.
the
I
table.
just
You
want.
just clarifying
I
what-
just was
We took a
clarifying.
vote last month.
Correct.
okay.
I just
And
wanted
did
to
that-
clarify the
We need the
motion that I
clarification.
made. That I thought it was pretty clear, but.
So that's why I did public comment at the beginning.
The
We just
thing
need
is, I want to be a
clarification.
good steward of public money for such an event. So I wonder if, maybe a budget for the event, not to exceed, if you think that there needs to be more community outreach, not to exceed 6,000 or whatever that budget is for the event. But events like this that have been happened in the past have had $3,500 budgets. So to be a good
who would
steward of public money.
But I don't think that the
budget
URA's ever door-knocked neighborhoods and done that kind of level of grassroots outreach.
Right.
And I don't know if you guys have ever done that and understand how many hours that is and how many people that involves. And it's not just whistling Dixie. I mean, go door knock and you'll see how long that takes to talk to folks to get them to turn out and
Are we
getting the
taking any
targeted
further
list.
action on voting? Because I have to leave.
I don't think so.
It sounds to me like the advisory board has advised that we go with
To
the-
do 5,000 and whatever
the
the event,
resolution.
I mean,
Anywhere else? Are we done?
Yeah.
Yes,
I think it's just report outs from here.
we're done.
I mean, because we don't have a
I
quorum.
do have to go.
We
I'm
don't have
sorry.
a quorum.
Quorum stand.
We don't have a quorum.
Stands.
How's the quorum stand? We have to stop if we're not allowed to take any action if we don't have a quorum.
There's,
We're
Everything
not taking any
else-
action.
Everything else is just updates.
apologize.
developed by the advisory board that when
the yeah.
quorum goes away, the quorum stands, but the vote has to still come out majority and who's left. So you can still
Can't take any action, right, without a
you can still take a vote, you just have to reach the majority of who's here now.
So was there a vote
There
last
was no
year
vote.
and did it pass? I mean, last
We
month
just
and
need a
did it pass?
clarification.
Yes.
So we don't need to take a vote.
We're done.
And the board is still on board with what was voted last month, so.
With that clarification.
I think we need
Correct.
We just need a
clarification from the
clarification.
law department.
Touche.
Thank you. There's no more business?
I'm confused too.
No more business, let's adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Woo-hoo.
Well.